Well, welcome everyone. This is Jill Danello. I'm the manager of educational programs at Green Education, and we welcome you today to our SWEEP Standard series. If you are not currently familiar with SWEEP, I know Rob will be starting us off today and telling us a little bit about the SWEEP Standard, and you can also catch up on previous webinars on the SWEEP YouTube channel available from their website. Today, joining us are Michael Siminitus and Scott Silva from Wastebusters. Several of you may already know Michael if you've participated in the Certificate in Sustainable Resource Management program. Michael is one of the instructors for our Zero Waste Events course. And if you haven't had a chance to check that out, we highly encourage you to, especially as events begin to get started again around the world. Anyway, without further ado, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can get us started today.
Okay, thanks so much, Jill. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to see that we have assiduous recyclers out there, and having confusion around what goes in what bin is a ubiquitous issue. I'm hoping that some of the things in SWEEP that we are encouraging, such as consistent signage, consistent color coding, etc., can help with that. We probably won't get quite into the weeds that much on this thing. Just a quick overview of SWEEP itself. It's the Solid Waste Environmental Excellence Performance Standard. And we are a suite of triple bottom line sustainable materials management standards that focus on certifying local governments and private sector material management companies that provide services to municipalities. Our goal is to integrate policy and practice and begin moving the industry towards sustainability, very similarly to what we did with LEED and green buildings. The LEED standard is something that I founded back in 1993 and ran it for the first 12 years, taking some of that experience into SWEEP and applying it to the materials management industry. Like LEED, SWEEP identifies and rewards leaders in sustainable materials management, provides third-party recognition for your efforts, and a standardized basis for incentive programs. And it has a lot of the structural elements that you might have, if you're familiar with LEED, that you might have seen. It's point-based, although the SWEEP Zero standard, which is sort of our leading edge standard, but that's not out in the market yet, will be a binary pass failure, either LEED Zero or you're not. But the goal of this set of standards is to transform the marketplace. And we have several categories, starting with policy and intent, looking at sustainable materials management. So you get credit for saying you're going to do something, but not necessarily doing it. And then in waste generation and prevention, you'll see a lot of elements around contamination there, where we focus on analyzing the materials in your waste stream, looking at its breakdown, where it goes, and also educating the public and people in the industry about sustainable materials management. And then we get into, because if you're not measuring things, you can't manage them. But if you haven't defined them, then you can't measure them. And so what SWEEP is trying to do is create a uniform, not rigid, but at least a consistent set of definitions for key elements in the materials management industry, so that we can begin actually comparing program results and ensuring that policymakers are getting what they expect, and allow private companies to benchmark themselves against their peers, or to set internal or to see how they're doing compared to internal benchmarks, which then they can report to their investors and the market generally. So after sort of the policy data piece, we get into the supply chain, where we look at collection, everything from efficiency in vehicles, route consolidation, route optimization, safety, training, and elements that make a good, sustainable solid waste collection fleet. The largest category, not surprisingly, is the recovery category, where we look at how much materials are being recovered, how much materials are being rescued. Are your MRFs or your compost facilities being operated in an environmental manner? Do they have efficient equipment? Are they being operated safely? And then finally, we have the disposal section. So you don't actually get credit for disposing of materials in SWEEP, but what you do get credit for is operating disposal facilities in the most environmental way possible. So if you're collecting your landfill gas and using it for something like, heating a fish farm, or if you have regular safety training, you manage litter, you're a good neighbor, all of those kinds of activities are rewarded in SWEEP. And then the innovation category are for things that we haven't thought of yet, or for exemplary performance in any of the other activities that are rewarded by SWEEP. So I mentioned it's a suite of standards. So we have the SWEEP Plus standard, which is out in the market now being pilot tested. We will be focusing next on the SWEEP Zero standard. Both of these standards are using a leadership consensus standard development process from American National Standards Institute, or ANSI or ANSI, accredited standard setting organization. We anticipate possibly using an American National Standard or ANS consensus process for SWEEP as we move into the more middle ranges of the market. My guess is that you'll probably see SWEEP Zero in the next year or two, and then within another year or so after that, SWEEP itself. Moving on to contamination, not a super revealing headline. It occurs all over the place. And the ranges of contamination itself vary widely. You've got, average facilities or average towns in the, mid 15 to 25% range. We'll look at a couple of case studies where contamination has been reduced to below 5%. And then you have other places where contamination is in excess of 30%. I think the underlying issues of contamination are similar, that there's confusion, that there may have been stops and starts in the program. Recycling programs like energy efficiency programs suffer often from starting and stopping depending upon market conditions, depending upon whether glass is collected one year and then the market evaporates, so it's not collected. So is it recyclable? Is it not? That kind of stuff. And then we have something that one of our steering committee members, Susan Robinson of Waste Management, has coined wish cycling. The idea that this is plastic, therefore it should be recycled, or what does it matter if there's a little bit of cheese on my pizza box? That's a lot of dead trees and I don't feel like putting it in the garbage, right? And so that's kind of, it obviously has negative ramifications, but what it also indicates is that there are a lot of folks out there that want to recycle more, would like an infrastructure where materials are more recyclable. And either that, there are, two components of that, the manufacturers of those items should be able to, produce things that can be recycled, and the infrastructure should be able to handle a wider variety of materials, so more things can actually go into the recycling bin. It's not a trivial issue, even that 15 to 25% can have very significant ramifications for the entire structure of recycling and its viability. You've got issues where contamination increases the cost of collection, and that obviously impacts municipal budgets. when contaminants go through material recovery facilities, they can either make it through into a bale and reduce the price of that bale. It can contaminate and clog and wind machines that were not designed to handle these kinds of materials. One of the big challenges with lightweighting and the evolving ton is that MRFs that were invested in the 80s or 90s are not able to handle the lightweight, composite, flexible materials that are more and more in the waste stream. And all these things set up a vicious cycle, right? If you've got material that doesn't work well, equipment that doesn't produce good quality at a reasonable price, so all of a sudden all your costs go up, and it makes investment in new infrastructure that could, the advancements in optical sorting, the advancements in physical sorting, machines today, we're seeing an absolute revolution in the machine component of this. It's been likened by some in the industry as the computer industry in the 90s, when the processing capacity and configurations were evolving very, very rapidly, and prices, we should be seeing prices for equipment coming down significantly, and seeing capacities of this equipment going up significantly. But that's, all of that, the ability to bring that new infrastructure into place is severely undercut by that vicious cycle of contamination. So you go from a situation where at least recycling isn't costing you anything to something where it can be a significant burden on the municipal budget. Now, it's not, like death and taxes, inevitable that there's going to be overwhelming amounts of contamination. So if we look at Cambridge, Massachusetts, they were on the good end of the contamination thing. They were in the low double digits, 10 to 12% range, but they figured that they could do significantly more. And so they, a few years ago, initiated a three-pronged program, which in 3 short years reduced contamination by about 2/3, and in the process, basically saved the city for all the in terms of more revenue, reduced costs, et cetera, almost $100,000 a year. So this is it is an investment that has an important return. And it's not like they had any special contamination situation that made it easier for them to reduce contamination. They had all the usual suspects: your films, your food contamination, your tanglers, and you're basically your flexible plastics, textiles, et cetera. That's all in the stream. But what they did was they used data, right? They went out and they looked in the bins, figured out what was there. They did some random samples, and they found, the outliers, started tagging those outliers in a friendly way, and did so consistently, and then coupled that with a consistent education program, in-person meetings, educational materials that were attached to the OOPS tags, PSAs, a whole range of things in terms of outreach. And as you saw on the previous slide, contamination is now in the low single digits and producing very good results for them. So looking at contamination in the context of sweep, it is a very important element in sweep. In fact, you can't get sweep without addressing contamination because it is part of 2 of the prerequisites. We have an additional 4 credits, and we have up to 8 points. Almost 10% of all the credits in sweep go to reducing contamination, and we look at both ends of the equation, or we look at all sort of the main components. The sort of the consumer piece, and making sure that there's education and ways of reducing inbound contamination into the recovery facilities, and then ensuring that the recovery facilities have adequate quality control, updated materials, updated equipment, et cetera. And SWEEP is mostly a performance standard, so we don't say, you get a point if you have an optical sorter. We basically say if your bale contamination rates are below a certain standard, then you get credits, right? So we focus on the outcomes and less on the instrumentality of those outcomes. So looking in the policy place, the prerequisite requires education and contamination reduction strategies in the basic sustainable materials management policy, either at the corporate level or at the town level. In addition, we focus on contamination standards in MRFs. And again, you get credit just for saying you have a contamination policy. You get credit for actually doing it later on. So as I noted, you don't actually have to do anything in the sustainable materials management policies section, but the reason we did that, and the reason there's a decent amount of points, is that we're coming right out of the box. We don't want to have a lot in the denominator that people haven't learned about, right? So we're coming out of the box with a new standard, and we don't want to say, okay, we're going to judge you against something you've never seen before, and oh, so sorry, you're not doing very well, right? So what we want to do is we want to get a framework of what a sustainable materials management policy looks like, get people on record having said, we support sustainable materials management and these following things, and then we can, take them to task. People can take them to task for it later on if they don't do it. But if the goal is right action, then stating intention is the first step towards right action, and that's why we emphasize policy. Similarly, looking at litter prevention and ensuring that people know when they're out in the street, not to put that pizza slice paper plate into the recycling bin because it's contaminated, and just ensure that people have infrastructure out in the street that is consistent with the goals of the program, and that provides a public education piece of it as well. And then we also give credit for additional education and engagement programs, and the emphasis here is more on source reduction and reuse, but ensuring that material streams going into the recovery stream are consistent is an important piece of that. And then finally, as I mentioned, part and parcel of the data that is required to be shared with SWEEP is what is your existing contamination rate. We don't judge it here. We just want to know that you have it and that you've calculated it, and we want to know what it is. Then moving on to recovery, this is sort of at least on the output side, the money credit, if you will, where we focus on contamination rate in bales. And you could also argue that producing high quality products from recovered organic materials looks at reducing contamination in green waste, et cetera. And that would have both an input and output component as well. So there's actually 5 credits and up to 11 points in SWEEP for reducing contamination. The specific language for the prerequisite is establishing public and education and information programs around sustainable materials management, including reducing contamination, and then source separating materials. And all of this is ensuring that the infrastructure and then the materials that are put in the infrastructure are clean and consistent with what the local policy can, the local infrastructure can accommodate. Similarly, the energy efficiency and contamination standards for material recovery facilities, that's consistent with the intent of this advanced sustainable materials management policy, that to adopt policies and programs to promote environmental stewardship, including highest and best use of materials, and reduce the overall generation of waste. So, as part of implementing your prerequisite programs, making sure that you've got these contamination standards, and that you're looking at ways to reduce contamination through better equipment, better education programs, et cetera. And then the analytic prerequisite, again, looks at establishing public and employee information programs, and analyzing the contamination and reporting that to SWEEP. Litter prevention, and ensuring that consistent education through labeling of acceptable materials in all container types. That, again, is part of that public-facing education and infrastructure that allows, that supports reduced contamination. And then, again, looking at education and information programs, just a lot of reinforcement of that, because that is an absolute key to ensuring that people not only recycle, but that they recycle properly. And then finally, on the mechanical side, just ensuring that your material recovery facilities are operated by the local government or by private industries have post-sorting contamination and residue rates using a visual inspection or counts of contamination methodology that are better than the ISRI scrap specification circular. And how much better will depend on the number of points you want to get, the type of MRF you have, et cetera. But this is where, sort of the mechanical and infrastructure piece of it is incentivized in SWEEP. So we really want to get everybody involved with SWEEP. You can visit our website at sweepstandard.org. We have a variety of memberships that are based on the size and type of members. So if you're a local government, it's not very expensive to join. And if you're a small local government below 30,000 people, it's like $250 a year, very reasonable. And when you participate, you get to share your expertise, you get to demonstrate your commitment to leadership, and you can also have a role in developing the standards, which will be on a continuous improvement basis. Every member of SWEEP gets 3 positions on committees to help us shape the future of materials management in the U.S. And we are also still looking for a couple of pilot participants in the SWEEP Plus standard. We have a half dozen local governments and a few private companies already participating. If you are interested in being a pilot, feel free to drop us a note. And I believe you can do it this way by sending us an email to info@sweepstandard.org. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and all things social. And thanks for your time and your attention. Jill, I don't know if we want to do questions now or if we want to give the floor to the good folks at Wastebusters.
I have 2 questions for you, Rob. Thanks for that. And then we'll do some questions for the Wastebusters guys at the end.
Perfect.
First question is, are there any plans to develop a SWEEP standard for general businesses, something that could help businesses benchmark even if they aren't at the point where they can achieve zero waste?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to give a plug to our sister standard, TRUE. The TRUE standard was developed by the Zero Waste Industry Association, and then it's being administered by the Green Business Certification, Inc. And it focuses on facilities, whereas so everything about reducing your waste internally and audits and all the activities that the Waste Busters folks do. And you get your business and your facility certified via True. And then what Sweep does is it will help verify that, the well sorted and reduced bins that you put on the curbside actually end up, turning into recycled content or are going to properly managed facilities, et cetera. So, the two standards complement one another. And in fact, we have, one of the founders of True on our steering committee to help us on our standards committee, helping us ensure that we are making our program consistent with True, so that when folks do things at the facility level, that it has a pipeline into the municipal infrastructure that will take that material to its final destination.
Excellent. Second question is pertaining to contamination management and Sweep, with the question of, is it focused solely on recycling or also landfill and compost?
So we do have, we do look at compost. Basically, you can't get credit for, obviously there's diversion, but if you want to get credit for high quality compost, you need to go through the STA certification process, which has very rigorous contamination elements to it. So obviously there's a lot of screening and a lot of, pre-sort that you'd want to do, either figuring out, what your bag and your conveyance situation is. So we don't really, like I said, we set performance standards. We don't tell people how to get there. So that's, we do look at that for composting for sure. And then, we are, part of the operating elements of operating a landfill properly, is to ensure that things like, cold ash or, biosolids and stuff like that are not used as alternative daily cover or ADC. The reason being is that, if there are certain wind conditions and things are dry, this highly contaminated dust can spread. And, in particular, a lot of landfills, have, are located in environmental justice crisis zones. So, you need to operate your facilities in that respect. So we do look at, the quote unquote contamination of alternative daily cover as part of that. So I guess, it's not exactly the kind of contamination we're talking about in this webinar, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Great. Well, that's it for the questions pertaining to Sweep. So the Waste Busters guys, Michael and Scott, feel free to transition your slides over. Rob, if you could unshare. And I will introduce you both. We are going to be hearing from Michael Siminitus and Scott Silva. Michael is the president of Waste Busters, Inc. and has been working against wastefulness by pioneering zero waste programs at events for the past 17 years. Through his work with Waste Busters, Michael has gained considerable special event experience, screening major San Francisco events. And beyond that, has accomplished many other zero waste projects, including various waste characterization studies and building services such as Waste Busters Zero Waste Facilitation Program, which we'll be learning about today. He's accompanied by his colleague, Scott Silva, who's the Zero Waste Program Manager at Waste Busters for the last 2 years. And Scott manages the Zero Waste Facilitation Program in San Francisco, leading teams that ensure buildings are properly diverting resources and complying with Recology's strict contamination limits for hauled materials, saving their customers money and educating tenants. So whenever you guys are ready, take it away.
Great, thanks for the intro, Sam. Like was mentioned, we've been doing special events for a long time. We kind of cut our teeth there, but we've also spent a good part of the last decade doing waste characterization studies, zero waste plans, and various other consulting projects. Uh, we have been faced with a lot of contamination in bins. You know, the special events, whether or not they had our service, you know, it's a very common thing that the bins would be full of recycling that was just way too contaminated and have to get landfilled because it just didn't even meet that minimum standard. So we came in and helped improve the contamination rates as well as the diversion. And we've created a number of strategies for that, whether it was you know, signage or additional sorting or going upstream and just limiting the types of materials that were allowed in the event in the first place. There are a lot of different strategies that we took to reduce contamination at events and achieve near zero waste at hundreds of events, large and small. So another thing that I mentioned we did was working at waste characterization studies. Back in 2014, we worked with Cascadia and CalRecycle, L2 Environmental, and a number of other consultants to go around and visit 220 different businesses across the state of California and assess, you know, while we were doing the recycling, going and assessing compost and recycling, and looking at not only, you know, what was in the bins, but what was bin contaminated, like, you know, because of contaminants in the bin getting on other clean material in the bin, and that material being ruined, or being source contaminated where it should never have been put in there in the first place, but how dirty it was. So these are some of the numbers from that 2014 study, and you could just see there's hundreds of thousands of tons, millions of contaminated you know, resources going to disposal or contaminating recycling, or even worse, organic streams. So, you know, it is a huge problem, and it makes recycling and composting more expensive. And now, you know, the state of California is taking action on that. So, I mean, obviously, for a long time now, if your recycling center was taking more than 50% in your blue bin of non-recyclable material, or if you had a diversion rate lower than 50%, you would lose your status as a recycling center and basically become a landfill transfer station, you know. So that happened here in Sonoma County with our previous recycler. So, you know, recycling contamination can be a big problem. Also, in terms of your organics recycling, you know, that's been something that's been an issue for quite a while. And we've worked on some studies to assess what kind of contamination is going into compost over studies, et cetera. But, you know, it's a lot. There's a lot of plastic getting in there, a lot of food service ware that's not compostable, food packaging. And so now with the new short-lived climate pollution law, SB 1383 here in California, there are new requirements for waste haulers to address this. So route reviews and waste evaluations at facilities will be required now. Further, in San Francisco, there is a new refuse separation ordinance, and that requires large refuse generators, which are buildings that generate more than 40 cubic yards a week of any combination of compost, recycling, and landfill waste to be audited, and they must achieve contamination thresholds below 5% for compostables, below 10% for recyclables, and below 20% for landfill. So contamination of landfill is, you know, stuff that could have been diverted or universal waste. I think it's pretty obvious. Non-recyclable materials, like materials that aren't accepted in the recycling system, are contaminants. It doesn't have to be as bad as, you know, a bunch of food waste, but it could be. It could also be bagged materials or you know, film plastic that isn't balled up into bags the size of a basketball. So the 5% or less than 5% threshold for compostables, though, is I think one of the most important, because you just can't separate that again, right? Once it's mixed, once it goes through trucks and whatnot, it's very difficult to remove contaminants from organic streams. There is some technology on the post end where you can screen some stuff out, but like with glass, all kinds of stuff will just get to be a small particle size and very difficult to remove, that really impacts the value of that super important commodity on the end. So yeah, there's fines if you don't comply, rate increases, and a requirement to hire zero waste facilitators. So yeah, Scott is our zero waste program manager who's been running our zero waste facilitation program. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott, tell you more about it.
So the Waste Boasters' approach to compliance with this ordinance was to create an integrated zero waste facilitation program, which I'm going to explain the model to you all. It basically, the basic practice is to inspect all waste that's incoming as tenants come to throw away their trash and make sure that it's properly sorted or resort and fix the contamination issues. If contamination is present, zero waste facilitation program staff will intervene and inform tenants of the issue. Some places that we work at, we actually are able to reject the waste entirely and have the tenants fix those issues after informing them of the problems that they've caused. And other sites, we will actually do the sorting and provide awareness and outreach to these tenants on what they need to fix next time they come down. The zero waste facilitation program manager will then go upstream to fix these issues and use data that's recorded by the zero waste facilitation program staff to address the issues that need to be fixed. So zero waste facilitation program staff have to be really experienced in documenting and tracking issues to identify sources of contamination. A web-based or some type of spreadsheet based platform that you can use to create a database is really helpful to relate certain events and certain contamination dates so that you're properly summarizing the information that you need to provide the building manager with actionable items. Maintaining a database that sorters use to identify waste stream specific issues, specific departments, specific tenants, dates, and specific waste streams that are problematic are really helpful points of data to record and to train your staff to identify. Things to look for are labels on bags, branding, other things that will clearly identify a tenant, and to teach your staff to be able to look for those in the trash when they are fixing contamination issues. Zero waste facilitation staff are really well-rounded, well-trained staff that have the ability to develop different professional skills. Safety is a really important aspect, obviously, in making sure that everyone has the right PPE and is doing the right sorting practices, but also ensuring that COVID compliance is followed, because you are often working with a lot of tenants, and it will make sure that the building management is satisfied with the service. Regular quarterly meetings with your staff is suggested so that everyone can get on the same page and understand the accepted materials in your jurisdiction. Obviously, we just talked about how recycling markets are changing all the time. Compostable plastics are phased out in certain areas, and being up to date on those and making sure that your staff are all on the same page is really important to ensure that materials are being properly sorted. And also just informing your staff of resources for tenants to drop off their e-waste or drop off other special hazardous waste that can't go in any of the bins is valuable to relay. Efficient sorting techniques are also really important. Just making sure that you provide a step-by-step and also building specific process to remove contamination. We spend a lot of time assessing the specific needs of the building and also the contracts that the tenants have with the building management companies, and making sure that we have a win-win situation for everyone involved that not only is reducing hauling costs, but also allowing for sorting and waste management to be just an easy process for everyone involved. The zero waste facilitation manager will provide regular reports to the building management team. These reports are done either daily, weekly, monthly, depending on the needs of the building. In San Francisco, Recology and the city require that these reports be done weekly at the least. the zero waste facilitation program managers or these consultants can offer waste audits that can provide a more in-depth characterization of the waste that's being generated within the building and provide further recommendations for supply chain as it relates to tenants serving food or packaging their goods. And usually these zero waste facilitators or zero waste facilitation program managers are very experienced in their fields and can recommend further changes to reduce waste and hauling costs. So for example, adding service or reducing service when it's needed or not needed, or also just accounting for changes in waste care or waste generation. Here's an example of one of our contamination reports. This is one that we do for a building that wants us to provide nightly reports so that they're ensuring that every day, because they get hauled, their waste gets hauled out every day, that every day the materials are properly sorted when it's taken away so that they are avoiding the fines that could be tacked on by a driver or by an audit. We provide a before and after pick. This is when the before pick is when the zero waste facilitation staff gets there. The after pick is after our staff remove contamination and record data. We provide notes on the landfill, the compost and recycle contaminants, common contaminants, as well as the specific tenants that did those issues. Providing specific problem tenant pictures of the contaminants is helpful for building managers. This will provide them with specific evidence to bring up with these tenants to ask for improvements. And we also provide an overall contamination level rating, which is averaged, and then just kind of gives an overview as time goes on how the contamination levels are improving. In this specific site, we've had problems with the bin overflowing, not only just landfill, but also the compost and the recycle. And especially with COVID and having to change the service levels so frequently, developing a calendar has been very helpful for us to optimize the hauling schedule so that we can reduce the cost for our clients and also for not making sure that Recology doesn't have to haul out empty bins. Database platforms and tracking the dates allows you to create, a calendar view that you can optimize not only your pickup schedules, but also your staffing levels too, to account for days when you need more service. For example, there's a property we work at that has a festival every year that we didn't account for one year, and the landfill was overflowing and created a mess. But the next year we were able to account for that need for increase of service and staff, and actually we're able to divert more materials just by having more capacity and more time to account for that increase in generation. Having different systems, technology, data recording system, as well as a trained staff allows for each area within your integrated zero waste facilitation program to work better. Staff can inform a zero waste facilitation program manager to audit or target certain tenants and educate them to sort better or use more compostables or recyclables. But also better data recording systems allow for the zero waste facilitation program staff to target and look out for certain problems or problem tenants, and also target certain waste streams more than other. For example, if there's a lot of soft plastics that just keep showing up in the recycle, maybe the zero waste facilitation staff will start on that the next day instead of doing compost the first day. Integrating all your systems to reduce contamination provides many benefits to building managers. Clearly, as the program is intended to do, is eliminates contamination charges and avoids potential fines from these contamination charges. These contamination charges are either retroactively applied if the LRG or large refuse generator fails an audit, but they can also be added on if a driver is emptying an open top, for example, and sees bagged material or compost in the recycle, and that's a daily fine. So us being on site every day and monitoring who's contaminating and us actually also fixing the issue avoids these additional fees that could be assessed by law. We maintain and improve diversion discounts that are offered by haulers. In San Francisco, Recology offers a diversion discount based on the volume of service that each of these large refuse generators has. And since that we sort more materials out of the landfill and into the proper containers, and also out of recycler compost and into the proper container, we are helping increase the diversion, not only by just the amount of materials that are actually recycled, but also supporting the use of compostables and other recyclable and compostable items in these tenants' business. We are able to identify problem tenants and frequent issues as they happen. This allows for us to solve problems upstream much easier, and having good record keeping allows for the building managers to also take part in this process, and allows them to view who is actually contaminating their waste streams with them not actually having to be there. Provides granular information, since we are inspecting every single bag and every single tenant's incoming waste. We are able to draw conclusions not only about their waste generation, but also on ways that we can improve the specific sorting practices at each tenant's store. As explained earlier, we are able to help increase diversion and related discounts that are offered for composting and recycling more materials. And we're able to provide occupants with awareness and information daily as staff are there and able to inform them of needs that they, or changes that they may need to make to their sorting practices to become in compliance with this ordinance.
Just jumping in here real quick, Scott. I know these monthly reports that we have will track how many potentially or how many instances that could potentially result in a fine each month. And I know at some buildings we're able to avoid 20 different instances where a contamination event where just one person throws in a bagged amount of recycling without emptying the bag, or put something in the wrong bin, that would trigger rate increases, for example. So yeah, our goal is to increase the amount of diversion at these facilities and reduce the contamination, avoid fines, but also provide the feedback to reduce the amount of waste generated. We can notice from some of our buildings, like in food service areas, that there's an outsized portion of the waste going to disposal coming from single-use disposable food serviceware. So we can track that and quantify it, and then propose reuse programs or ways to move away from those wasteful items that lead to an outsized portion of what's being disposed. And that also reduces hauling costs and overall costs. So on our way to zero waste, we recycle more, and then we want to generate less. In conclusion, our zero waste facilitation program that combines knowledgeable staff, appropriate technology, contamination monitoring, and educational resources that stay up to date, hands-on sorting, and just a presence making these programs work is effective in reducing contamination and that constant improvement of waste management practices at our clients' buildings and anyone that adopts a zero waste facilitation program. If you have any questions about contamination removal, our zero waste program, or our events program, you feel free to reach out to me. Our website's wastebusters.info. Scott is also available if you have questions about the zero waste facilitation program specifically. And I also want to take a moment before we get to questions to do a shameless plug. We just did another podcast episode. We started a podcast this last year and had the opportunity to interview Will and Sam from Sweep. So that episode was just posted, and I would like to share that in the chat here for you all. Now, are there any questions from the attendees?
Yeah, we got a few for you, Michael and Scott. Thanks for all that. I'll start with a general one. What are the biggest challenges associated with carrying out the zero waste facilitation program?
That's a good question. That's that's why I really wanted to present on the idea of like an integrated system today. Honestly, it's always an ever-changing problem, whether it be one tenant that just refuses to sort, building management being preoccupied with other problems that they have to fix at the building, and us not being able to reach out to them, or even just building specific problems, whether, like, for example, a construction site and blocking our access to the dumpsters and making our sorting area inaccessible. There's always a new problem. It seems like, trash is kind of something that people like to put, would like to put that in the back of their mind, kind of forget, wish that, it would just go away, which is a benefit of having us there, right? Because we get, we're the ones that are going to be handling it and be in charge of it, and also making sure that it's done right, and relieving that stress from the building management. But being able to, have these integrated systems of staff that are always on site, historical records from data that's properly kept, and then also just a program manager that's able to reach out to tenants directly and inform them of the problems and provide suggestions, can really help address each specific problem depending on what you see fit as a solution. For us, just generally speaking, the biggest problem has most probably been having to optimize or having to link the connection between ecology, building management, and us. Sometimes there's issues with like hauling or what we need to sort, and also what we communicate with tenants. There's just a lot of stakeholders, but it's getting a lot more streamlined, and ecology has been very helpful at providing resources online for us zero waste facilitators to learn what we need to do or what their needs are, as well as what we can do to inform tenants on proper sorting in San Francisco.
Great, thanks, Scott. Another one, do you have staff monitoring trash drop off in real time throughout the day, or just at the end of the day where you look through what's already been dropped off earlier in the day? And how cost effective is the monitoring service?
So we actually do both. We have we're very, at least us Wastebusters, we're pretty modular. We kind of look at each building individually and try to develop a program to fit their specific needs. And for example, like where we do monitoring throughout the day, there's a lot more tenants and a lot more stakeholders at this certain property. So it's actually more efficient for us to be there throughout the day, since we have to interact with so many people throwing away trash. But at some of the smaller properties where they may develop the same amount of trash at the end of the day, but there's only, say 12 or 15 tenants versus 60 to 80. That's something that you can do at the end of the day, probably. And once you start to get to know the waste that everyone generates and the bags they use, and also, like where to look on the boxes for the label for who threw the box in the landfill, this starts to get easier over time. And that tends to be more cost effective for buildings to kind of go at the end of the day when all the trash is thrown away. But the other thing to note is that,
yeah, just to jump in there, we did at one of the larger buildings that you mentioned, we did limit the open hours for the dumpsters so that there were certain times that we would be there, so it wouldn't have to be a 24-hour shift.
Yeah, so based on like the budget of the building, we can then adjust when we're monitoring, and also the access to the bins, so that people aren't say dumping after hours or dumping where they shouldn't be.
And also it was mentioned that the number, whenever we bid one of these buildings, we can look at their service level and what it would look like if they were contaminating, and seeing their rates double and getting fines, or looking at their existing fines, and then we compare it to having us on site. Yeah, there's that consistent cost for our service, but it's much cheaper than just going ahead and letting things get out of control and get all kinds of fines and rate increases.
The other thing to note too about when times of the day to monitor the trash as it is incoming into the be disposed of is, the nature of the rest, or like the tenants, or, if it's offices, it might be, you might only need to be there in the afternoon, late afternoon, at closing. If it's restaurants, they don't usually they usually throw away trash right in the opening and then right at closing. So just getting an idea of how waste and when waste is generated, you can optimize that schedule and work with building managers to, get a good price for everyone, but also provide enough time to make sure that you are able to intercept and manage all the waste that's coming in.
Great. Has there been any recycling centers that you guys know of that have actually lost their official status due to failing audits? And also, how extensive are these fines for these facilities?
You want to go for that, Michael?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, in Sonoma County, the previous recycling provider did just tell everybody in the county, just put whatever in the blue bin, film plastic, whatever, just, that it was like encouraging wish cycling. And it got to be so bad with contaminated materials and just unaccepted materials that the recycling center was getting less than 50% of a diversion rate at the center. So they lost their contract and Recology moved in. Now we're getting a much higher level of service. And there's a lot more education going on in the community. Their outreach is just above and beyond what the previous hauler was doing. It's the Ratto group, I believe. So yeah, we're really happy with what Recology has done in the community, going upstream, educating people, and achieving better recycling rates at that center. I actually have a video that's going to be coming out soon, a 360 video tour of that center. So keep an eye out on our YouTube page if you want to check that out.
And then addressing the question of fines, I believe the retroactive fine is up to $1,000 a day. It's all variable. I think it depends on severity of the fine, the severity of the contamination, and as well as like the compliance, the effort toward compliance that the building is presenting itself. In our experience at the properties we work at, we've on certain days when the bins were unable to be serviced due to we had one day, for example, where we were unable to actually access the building and service the bins, and they only issued a contamination charge for the night because the driver saw that there was black bags or bags material on the recycle, but we didn't get assessed. You only get us only after it happens every 3 years. Once a building gets those retroactive contamination charges, they can request to have them removed by doing another audit, which can be done within a year of the first audit. And that they also are required to hire a zero waste facilitator if they fail an audit in order to get that re-audit.
Another thing on that, though, that's a big part of the importance of our daily reporting, because at times there'll be illegal dumping. People will come and poach the dumpster, and we'll have a nice, clean, sorted recycling bin. And then all of a sudden there's all these black bags full of, cannabis grow derivatives or whatever. So using our database and being able to check what date that the Recology driver noticed contamination, when we see it on a bill, we'll go back to that date and say, no, everything was perfectly sorted. What's going on here? These pictures don't line up, but their timestamp is a couple hours after our crew left, and then we didn't even need to go through the whole security and looking at the cameras thing. We just told them here's what we saw when we left. This is probably illegal dumping. And they took that fine off.
Are you guys using smart bins like the folks from Compology or some of these other sort of in-bin monitoring and auditing services?
No, we just have our staff with smartphones at this point instead of installing permanent technology. That is a really cool company and concept. Everyone has the tool these days, and we have staff so frequently, it's easy enough to snap a photo that goes into our database.
And where's the fine coming from? Is it from the state?
So the city ordinance allows the hauler to assess fines onto the bill. So I don't think this is something that normally is allowed. Like the haulers, it's a city by city contract, right? That haulers have with the city, and I guess this ordinance was passed to empower or to allow Recology to assess these fines and make them mandatory to be paid as well.
Gotcha. I think we have time for one last question. Are any of your clients not subjected to city ordinances or other regulatory drivers? That is, they're looking to improve voluntarily.
That's a really good question. We are only working currently with people that need to come into compliance. However, we have, and also this is something that Recology has noted on their website and just at other presentations, that when a property hires a zero waste facilitator, they tend to develop a good relationship. And even after they've removed contamination charges and fulfilled the term of the contract, they tend to get rehired, which has happened in our cases. We've removed contamination charges at some of our properties and are still helping them work on sorting, even though they do need it. And, they need us to go and fix the issues because they would fail. Like every day when we go take the before picture is not satisfactory, but they're definitely, improving and, we have a really good relationship with the building management team.
So also to follow up on that, we haven't done much outbound and areas outside of San Francisco and the areas affected by this. It really is a strong incentive to have those kind of fines in place. Right now, a lot of haulers around the Bay Area where we're located do not have such programs that incentivize decontamination and purer streams. So this just isn't on the building or the building manager's radar in a lot of ways. They just they think their recycling is fine when it's really contaminated. But as we'll see with organics and SB 1383, there's going to be a lot of people getting kind of a wake up call that their compost is not clean enough. Yeah. So we're still developing the program. We started it in early 2019, and it's actually been great through 2020 for us, having events completely go away, and a good chunk of our primary service. So this has been something that we've got a chance to develop a lot, and we'll be rolling out on a much wider scale in the next couple of years throughout the state.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mike and Scott and Wastebusters, and per usual, Rob. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Just a quick reminder that SWEEP will be having our next webinar with SWANA sometime at the end of August or beginning of September, I think. So keep an eye out for that. And thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And just a quick reminder that the webinar was recorded and will be available early next week from the SWEEP website. So if you want to review any of the information or share it with your colleagues. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Keep it separated.